Hey, welcome back to Liam Locke Gaming. I'm Liam Locke, and we are back in the Flight Simulator X Steam Edition Flight Simulator. Today we are flying from Jacksonville International Airport to San Diego International Airport in this Boeing 747. We're going to go through the cold and dark startup hopefully fairly quickly and get ourselves on the way. Also, I've got some additional add-ons I've plugged into my Flight Simulator just to give it some additional realism. Just to go down that list real quick, I've got the Rex 4 Texture Direct Pack, the RAS Professional, the HD Airport Graphics, the FS Global 2010. Now, I know that's an older one, but still that improves the terrain and the elevation as we're flying low over the ground, and also improves apparently the textures used around the world. So that's really cool. We've got View and Slew, Moving map, which I really held off on getting Moving Map, but I gotta tell you, I like it. Especially the airport details, being able to look at the layout of the airport and where all the gates are. That's a tremendous help, so I like that. GSX Ground Services, of course, which you've seen. Newly added not long ago, the Active Sky 16, so we've got some dynamic weather, which again really enhances the realism of the flight. And of course, this new PMDG Boeing 747-400 aircraft, which I'm looking forward to flying. Let me just show you the moving map. I really do like this add-on. If I bring that up over here, here is a moving map in a representation of the airport, so we can see that we are at the terminal, parked down here at our gate. We're at gate G29. A little hard to read that on this particular display, but we can zoom in, zoom out. We can turn off this presentation, and as we travel on our trip today from Jacksonville to San Diego, we can zoom out and actually see where the plane is over the United States, and it'll track along with us on the flight. Even show us the AI traffic that's around us. So really nice add-on to the game. I do like this a lot. So it's early morning hours. Our flight today is scheduled to leave local time about 8:10. Let's just jump in the aircraft here. We were cold and dark, so we got to get things going first. So let's go ahead and start our procedures for power up. I have put together, based on the documentation, my own little custom checklist just to kind of consolidate things and hopefully move this process along that much faster. So if we go up to the overhead, one of the first things we need to do is obviously get the battery turned on, so we're going to do that first. We get a little bit of activity on the overhead console. Aircraft's coming to life. Another thing I like about the cold and dark state for this 747 compared to the Boeing 777 is if we look outside again, you'll notice, let me just jump around here to the other side of the aircraft. Notice that the ground power to the aircraft is already connected for us, as well as the air conditioning. These yellow tubes here connecting into the aircraft. So we're already receiving conditioned air and electrical power connected, where cold and dark in the 777, none of that stuff's connected, and it's not easy to do that early on in the game without turning on the APU because we can't get the CDU to fire up. So I definitely like that change here in the 747. Back into the overhead console with the battery switch on, we want to turn the standby power to auto, and more of the aircraft will start to initialize and light up. From there, before we go to power, we want to make sure that some of the systems are turned off and not unexpectedly on. So we take a quick look down here at our hydraulic demand pumps. They're all in the off position, which is expected. Just confirm that our windshield wipers are off. They are both off, in fact. Our alternate flap selector, which is going to be down here on this side of the aircraft. So we have our alternate flaps are off. It's not armed, so that's expected. Landing gear is in a down position. Confirm that it is. Flap position indicator. Flaps are fully retracted. They're in the up position, and that confirms with what we're seeing here on the ECAS display that they are up, so that's good. Back overhead, real quick, looking at the bus tie switches. They're all in the auto position, which also is expected. And from here, with those preliminary checks in place, we can go to external power. So we'll activate external power 1, activate external power 2, and now we can start to hear more of the aircraft coming to life, including the equipment cooling fans start to fire up, and we're ready to proceed with our startup. One of the first things we need to do, since this aircraft was off, is we need to get our inertial reference system activated. So again, up here on the overhead console, we have our IRS. The IRS is a redundant system. We've got 3 inertial reference units here. We want to put them all 3 into the nav position. And that's going to initialize each of those inertial reference units. Go back down here and take a quick look at our ECAS. You'll see an indication here that alignment has taken place. Now it says 0 minutes. I'm not sure why that says 0 minutes, but there must be another step that needs to be done. We'll just ignore that for the time being. We do want to look at the status page on our ECAS. Similar to the 77, the 777, the 747 has a little display control panel up here by the first officer side, because he or she is typically manipulating those buttons and checking these systems. Just to make it easier for us, we can control that from the CDU by turning on this display control, this control panel display, and then we can do ECAS center panel. So from here, we'll take a look at the stat. We're able to take a quick look at oxygen pressure for the crew and passengers is good to go, normal. We can see we don't have any hydraulic pressure right now. Our hydraulic quantity in those systems is normal, nothing unexpected there. Quick spot check of our main battery and APU. Those all appear to be good. APU battery is actually charging now with ground power connected. We don't have any warning messages on the ECAS that we don't expect to see at this particular point. We have some doors open. We don't have any hydraulic pressure systems activated yet. All of our engines are of course shut down. So that's all expected information. At this point, the PMDG guide that comes with the Boeing 747 talks about a bunch of other checks that you might do in real life. Obviously, we don't need to do any of those here in the flight simulator, but just to give you an idea, things like checking maintenance documents, flight deck access, circuit breakers, emergency equipment, hatch, smoke evacuation handle, overhead maintenance panel, all these things that there's really nothing for us to do here in the flight simulator, so we're going to skip right on by those. The parking brake we don't need to set right now because outside the aircraft we do have the cones and the wheel chocks already set up. So take a quick look. We got to get in here just a little bit closer. You can see there the cones are active, and you can see the yellow wheel chocks under the wheels. So no need to make any changes there. It'd be kind of cool if we could do a walk around, because one of the other checks at this point would be for the first officer to go out, or the captain to go out and do a walk around and check the aircraft. But no need to do that. From here, we've got the ground power connected up. We are ready to start programming our FMC, but before we do that, we want to use GSX ground services and get our catering taken care of, and also call for fuel. So we're going to get that started. We do catering first. We got here, yeah, we'll just use them. We'll use the default. That's fine. And then we're going to also schedule our refueling, and that will come after catering, which we've seen that a couple times. So we'll let that go, and now we want to get into the FMC and start that programming. Now I want to make this, excuse me, I want to make this so you can see, actually what we'll do is we'll just bring it up, it'll make this a little easier to see. Well, I want it so you can see the navigation display as well as the FMC, the CDU, while I'm programming it. First thing we want to do is go out here to the FMC, and we can see that the identification of our aircraft is a 747-400, which is what we expect. We can see the engine type that's on this aircraft, our air data is correct, all of that looks normal. And our first warning is we need to enter our inertial reference system position, which we get that from GPS. So we're going to go over here to the position in it. We'll spot check the time. So as of 12:39 Zulu is the time shown here. If we take a look at the clock, we can confirm that in fact it is 12:39 Zulu. Just get this lined up again. So this was our GPS position. We're going to go ahead and click that. That's going to drop it down here into the scratch pad, and now we're going to set our IRS position with that exact value. That's good. That initializes our IRS system. You can see that our primary flight display and navigation display update with that information. We're going to drop in our reference airport for where we are. So we are at Jacksonville. That's KJAX. And then we're going to go to route. Put our origin airport in again as KJAX for Jacksonville, and today we are flying to San Diego, and that's going to be KSAN. And our flight number today is going to be 6301. No need to enter the runway. We're going to do that on the next page that we go to. Go to departure and arrival, our departure from Jacksonville. We want to look at our flight plan, and we have assigned our runway from the flight plan that we filed with SimBrief. And now it looks like we'll take a break from this here for just a second. Catering vehicles are in position, so they're outside and ready for us. We want to go back in and get the doors open for them. They want right 1 and right 5. So we want to go to the next page. Open right 1 and right 5. So there they go, they have the doors open. They're going to continue to load the aircraft with our catering services. We're going to let them finish doing their thing. Go back to our FMC. And we're at our departures for Jacksonville Airport. And according to our flight plan, we have been assigned runway 8. Now that could change, but we'll go ahead and drop that in because if it changes, it won't be a big deal to modify that. So runway 8. And it looks like they want us to use a standard instrument departure or a SID of a Jet IN2. So we'll select that. And the first waypoint on our flight plan is CAPS, so that's going to be our transition. One thing I wanted to point it out as we pick these things, I just picked the transition. Notice that on the navigation display, when I selected runway 8, it shows me the runway orientation on the navigation display. So that's really cool. It's not something I had picked up on before. So 08 starting here, we're heading out this direction. We're going to go back to route and we'll go to next page and start entering in the rest of our flight plan. So from the CAPS waypoint, we continue with our flight plan entry. Okay, it looks like catering is done. They want us to close the doors for them. Come back to our flight plan here in just a second. That's going to allow them to move on about their business, and we're going to continue on with our flight management computer programming. That completes the airways and the waypoints to take us to San Francisco. From here, we want to go and set up our arrival. So San Francisco arrival. According to the flight plan, we are going to be using runway 27. Now, I'm a little surprised here because this doesn't appear to be an ILS-enabled runway. So we'll see what happens when we get closer to San Francisco, but something to be aware of, because runway 27, here it is, we'll just go ahead and select 27. And according to the flight plan, we are using a STAR, or Standard Terminal Arrival, and it's going to be Lucky 1. Lucky 1. And our transition into Lucky 1 is from the Hogs. That was our last waypoint. So all of this looks good. Jump back out and take a quick look at our legs. Scan through here and make sure that we don't have any discos or flight discontinuities. And we've got a bunch of additional waypoints that get added automatically for us, which is expected and normal. And we do have a route discontinuity here when we head to the runway. So from our last waypoint of Lindy, we want to tell it that we're heading direct for the runway. Of course, we'll be vectored in by ATC. So we just select the runway, put it down here in the scratch pad, and we're going to drop it in up top here. That looks good. That gets rid of the flight discontinuity, and at this point we can activate our flight plan. So we're going to click activate and execute it. So now our flight plan is active. Before we move on with initializing our performance information, we need to go and set up our payload. Go back to FS Actions, take a look at our payload. This is kind of default numbers that the aircraft puts in for itself when we initialize it in cold and dark. We're going to change these, but we're not going to change the individual passenger or cargo. We're going to go here to our zero fuel weight, and according to our flight plan, our calculated zero fuel weight comes in at 242 metric tons, because we are using kilograms here. So 242, we'll drop that in for zero fuel weight, so 242.0. That puts us, we've got a pretty heavy load, right? 93.9% loaded, so we're pretty much maxed out. With that information entered, we also want to go to our fuel. We are expecting the fuel truck here momentarily. Currently we've got a minimum amount of fuel, right, only 10.5%, or 18,300 kilograms of fuel on board. Our block fuel requirement for our trip today to San Diego is going to be 62.3. I'm not going to make that change yet because I want to do that when the fuel truck arrives. Just hop outside real quick. Hey, in perfect timing, look at that. Here comes the fuel truck into position. And this is pretty straightforward. We said 62.3. That's set, and we jump outside again. Heat is going to be done almost immediately. So we're ready to proceed. So we've got our fuel on board for this flight. We're going to go back to our FMC. We want to continue our setup of our flight with our performance information. So we go to our init reference. Let me just bring this up again so you can see it. Init reference. We want to recall the zero fuel weight that we just programmed in. Right, and that was 242. So if we click right here, 242, and drop that into zero fuel weight, that gives us automatically our gross weight at this point, 304,300 kilograms, 304.3 metric tons. Reserves fuel, according to our flight plan, is 9.4 metric tons. 9.4 metric tons of fuel. Our cost index, which just controls how efficiently we utilize that fuel, is set for 40 today. And our cruising altitude is going to be, it looks like 360, flight level 360. That's 36,000 feet. All right, 36,000 feet. That completes this screen. We want to go to our thrust limit page. And we've got a fairly long runway today, so we don't need full power. Weather appears to be clear, so we're going to do a derated takeoff, and we're going to go ahead and drop not 20% because we have such a full load, so we're fairly heavy. So I'm just going to do an 8% decrease in thrust rather than put in the assumed temperature. We could do that, but the 747 doesn't have the performance spreadsheets for really calculating the assumed temperature. So this just makes it easier. 8% derate, that'll be more than adequate. Keeps us from using 100% of the power. The whole point of a derate, if you look into it at all, is basically to minimize maintenance and wear and tear on the engines. We don't want to run them at 100% every time we take off. And for takeoff, we'll go to the next takeoff page. We want to indicate our flaps. Standard flaps takeoff for this 747 is flaps 10. Flaps 10. And we want to recall our center of gravity from our payload. When we did our zero fuel weight, the distribution of weight for passengers and cargo is automatically placed throughout the plane, and it calculates the center of gravity for us. So we just do a recall on that value, and that's 23%. That affects the trim. So it looks like 5.6 trim is what we have defined. And then with that information, we get our V1, VR, V2 speeds. So our rejected takeoff speed will be 139. And we just click that because we're dropping that information over here onto the speed tape. Our rotate speed is going to be 151 knots, and our minimum climb is 165 knots. And we're going to make a quick note of those as well. All right, and that completes our setup of the FMC. We'll go back here to legs. We'll drop this off the screen. We can see we've got some additional information here. If we zoom out just a little bit, we can start to see that flight plan show up on our navigation display. We can even look at it by going to plan and actually step through the various steps of the flight plan. So if we zoom out here even more, we can see we're taking off in the opposite direction of our flight plan. So no sooner do we take off, and we're going to have to kick around almost 180 degrees and come back to our first waypoint, which is why this has got vectors down here, because we're going to have to vector to our initial waypoint. ATC will take care of that for us. They'll turn us around and get us heading in the general direction, and then we can just engage our flight plan there. So all that's fine. Let's keep things going. At this point, we want to go ahead and get boarding requested. We've got fuel on board. So, request boarding. My GSX configuration, no, absolutely not. We're not doing 600 passengers. Let's just do 150 today, just because we want this process to go fairly quickly. And we want to go ahead and listen to ATIS. See if, because of the weather and the wind, which is dynamic, being provided by active sky, whether or not we will actually get runway 8 for takeoff. Oh, I love this. So it didn't respond, and it didn't respond because our radio, although it's on, we don't have our audio knob active. So we'll do that real quick. I'm going to go ahead and just plug everybody else's. This is going to be right. Now we should be able to hear ATIS. Try that again.
Jacksonville Airport information, 1256 Zulu. Wind calm. Visibility greater than 20 miles. Sky conditions. Few clouds at 5,700. Temperature 152.5. Altimeter 29902. ILS. Runway 7 in use. Landing and departing runway 7. VFR aircraft say direction of flight. All aircraft read back with short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact without Zulu. Jacksonville Airport information Zulu. 1256 Zulu. Wind.
Alright, that's exactly why we do this, because we actually, takeoffs and landings are occurring on runway 7 today. We did get our barometric pressure, which is standard at 29902, and that is currently set, so no changes there. We want to go back down to our FMC and just give it the updated information. So runway 7, go back to departure arrivals. For our departure, instead of runway 8, so this is interesting. The ATIS says runway 7. There is no runway 7, and if I look at the moving map page, yes, there is no runway 7. So ATIS is just off there. It's a disconnect in the application, so we're going to keep going with runway 8. So it doesn't appear there actually is a change, which I guess that makes sense. Runway 7 and runway 8 would be awfully close to one another directionally. Alright, so no change there. So we'll jump up to the overhead panel. These checks are typical. Basically, we're going to run down the columns of the overhead panel and just make sure that our buttons are in a correct position. So our electronic engine controls are all set to normal. That's what we expect. Standby power is set to auto. Is correct. Our utility power switches are on. Our battery switch is on. We did that earlier. Our bus tie switches are set to auto. Is correct. Our generator switches are set to the on position. That's correct. Those will come to life once the engines come online. Currently, without the engines, right, our drive disconnect are all illuminated. That is normal. We're going to go ahead and start the APU. To get it ready, we'll need the APU in order to start the engines. So APU to the on position. Hold this to the start. And then that'll go back to the on position, and the APU will start to initialize. Outside, GSX Ground Services is in the process of loading cargo and all the passengers' luggage onto the aircraft. I really do like GSX. Such amazing realism that they put into the animation of interacting with the aircrafts, and they support even, you know, all the various aircrafts, whether you're flying an Airbus, whether the 777 or the 747. I mean, these aircrafts all have different sizes. I find it interesting that though the 747-400 is larger, slightly larger than the 777, they're not too far off. I mean, 747-400 only has about, what is that, about another 21 feet lengthwise on the 777. And from a width perspective, the wingspan of a 747 is actually just a little bit shorter than the wingspan of the 777 by about a foot. Well, that's pretty interesting. So back in here, our APU should be online. If we go back to the overhead console, what we'll see is the APU, Generator 1 and Generator 2 become available, and we can switch over to that at this point. So we'll go ahead and hit APU Generator 1 on. That automatically switches the server from the external power connection, and we're going to do the same thing for APU Generator 2. Once again, external power gets disconnected. So now the aircraft is running off of power from its auxiliary power unit. Scan our hydraulic demand pump switches. They're still in the off position. We don't have any change for those at this point, but that's coming up here momentarily. Hydraulic engine pump switches should all be on. Here the hydraulic pump switches are on the on position. Our emergency lights up here should be armed, so we just close the cover. That automatically arms it, puts those in the right position. Observer's audio is normal. Our service interphone is off. Our main transfer for main 1 and 4 is in the off and closed position, so no changes there. Our fire switches, it's a little hard to see these, but these should be in the in position, so they are. They're all in. Our APU is in the in position as well. And we can do a quick test of those. Good to go. None of the discharge lights are on as far as putting out a fire, so nothing to fix there. All of our engine start switches are in the in position. A little hard to tell that from here. If we actually go down and look at this overhead console from the cockpit, or from the captain's seat, you can see that these are depressed. If I click on it, it actually comes out to start the engine. So they're all down in the right position. Our standby igniter is in the normal position. Our continuous ignition switch is off, and our auto ignition switch should be set to 1 or 2. We're going to put it in the 1 position. We don't have any fuel jettison requirements, so those are all off. No change to be made here. We want to look at the fuel panel. All the X-feed valve switches, that's these here across the top, should be on, and they are. The line just indicates there's a connection, so they're in the on position. Our nacelle and wing anti-ice are all off. Our window heat switches, we do want to turn those on. Those in the on position. Check our lights. No need to have any lights yet. We're not prepared to taxi. Up here, passenger oxygen. This is what drops the masks. That's closed, which is where it should be. Our yaw damper switches are in the on position. The oxygen control for the cabin is all set normal, so norm. None of these systems are, none of these switches are turned on. They should be auto off and normal, so that's correct. Environmental control, I like to turn down just a little bit the air conditioning in both the flight deck and the cabin. Trim air switch should be on. Our recirculating fans should be on, upper and lower. Our aft cargo heat indicates that it should be in the off position right now. Let's turn that off. Probably because they're loading the aircraft. It wouldn't make much sense to heat it while they're loading the aircraft. Equipment cooling selecting is normal. So equipment cooling is normal. Gaspers are on since passengers are boarding the aircraft. That's the little air vents above them. Looking at our bleed air. So currently the pack control switches should all be in normal. We want to move those all to the normal position. That's kind of important because that controls the actual air conditioning going into the cabin. So the temperature, if we go back here, look at our synoptics for our environmental control system. 23 is our master temperature in centigrade, and the cabin was actually getting quite warm. So the outside air temperature is 15 degrees Celsius, which is that's a little chilly, but it was getting hot. I guess all those people moving about the cabin, it was starting to get warm there in the back of the cabin. So they're probably thankful that I just turned the air on for them. We'll start to see these temperatures adjust now that we've got bleed air going into the cabin. Yeah, they're starting to come down now. Whew. Good thing we took care of that. Let's go back up top. Almost done with our checks up top here. So bleed is now running. Isolation should be, yep, they're all in the on position. Engine bleed is in the on position. That is correct. Isolation valves are on. They are. Perfect. Down to our lighting panel. We really should have our nav lights on. Probably should have done that sooner than now. We'll turn those on. Everything else can stay in the off position for right now. It's daylight outside, so we don't need any of the other lights. From the overhead console, we want to drop down to the first officer's side of the aircraft. These checks that we're going through typically are done by the first officer. Get our flight director system turned on. This is our EFIS panel, which stands for Electronic Flight Instrument System control panel. We received our barometric pressure reading, which was 29902, so there's nothing to change there. Our minimums will be a barometric pressure minimum, so we don't need to change that dial. And the current map setting and zoom is adequate for us, so we don't need to make any changes there. Similar to the 777, we do have an oxygen mask. Standard procedure for them, I guess, to do a quick check of this system. All good to go. The source select for our displays is handled from the source select control panel over here. First officer, everything is on the right, so flight director is managed from the right, FMC is right, the EIU, which stands for the EFIS ECAS interface unit selector, is set to auto. Our IRS is the right IRS system, so our inertial reference system, we're using the right IRU. And our air data is also coming from the right IRU. Looking at our display controls, so our lower CRT is set for normal, and our inboard CRT right here is set for normal as well. No changes to that. Flight instruments all look to be normal. I don't see any issues, no unexpected warnings. Our clock looks to be set correctly, so 13:12. Our departure, we're supposed to be doing pushback here really soon because 8:10, so we're running just a tad behind. All of our ground proximity systems are in the off position, which is normal. Our alternate gear, all of this stuff is turned off, which is what we would expect. The first officer would also check the radios. I changed those earlier so we could listen to ATIS, so left radio is all configured and good to go. Our center radio is fine. First officer's radio is configured correctly, no changes there. We have our no smoking. If I go here, make this a little easier to read. Hello. Too far. Our no smoking, we're going to go ahead and put that into the on position. Our seatbelts should be set for the on. Our evacuation signal is all set and ready to go. The guard is closed, so no change there. We do want to activate the weather system, which is right up here in the center. So weather, we'll do weather and turbulence for both the left and right navigation displays, and the tilt. You can see this button is depressed, so it's set for auto tilt. We don't need to manage that, which is what we want. That's perfect. And boarding is complete, so that's great. They're done. We're nearing our completion. We'll be ready for pushback here in any moment. Let's go and close the doors real quick. Nice little feature here is we don't have to do doors individually. We can just say close all doors. Get those doors closed up. And once they're closed, we'll get the option to arm all the doors. We'll go ahead and arm all the doors. So now that is good to go. get rid of this page, put it back on legs. Go down here and look at our transponder. Currently we are in standby. We want to set our auto brakes for rejected takeoff, so they're set now. And the captain does a similar set of checks. We can just do those real quick. His EPIS panel should be set pretty much the same way. No changes here. Barometric pressure is what we'll use for our minimums. When we get to that point, we are doing barometric pressure in inches of mercury. Go back to map. Bring our range back in for takeoff. No other changes up there, but we can activate the weather. So we'll see this little weather indicator put on the display. Likewise on this side, we want the captain's MCP to be put, flight director to be enabled. We'll see flight director active on the primary flight display. Similar with his source selectors, he's got his own source selection panel over here on the left. For the captain, it's everything on the left, FMC left, the EPIS, ECAS interface unit is auto, and then we're getting our inertial reference system. Our initial reference unit is the left one, and air data coming from the left IRU. Same thing, inboard CRT normal, lower CRT is normal, no changes there. Flight instruments all look to be correct, no issues there. With our standby equipment, we want to just do a quick pull on the knob here, make sure that our attitude indication is correct, looks to be correct. Airspeed indication, obviously we're not traveling at all right now, so that looks good. Our altimeter is also got the correct barometric pressure reading, and we've got the correct altitude referenced. So it looks normal. We want to check our flight controls. So flaps are currently in up position, speed brake is off, our throttles are in the idle position, our reverse throttles are also disengaged. This is an important check because if these are not in the correct position and you start the engines, that thrust will kick in one way or the other. Parking brake, we'll go ahead and set the parking brake right now. One thing worth noting is that even though I've set the parking brake, if you look over here at our brake pressure, very low. So I wouldn't trust the parking brake to hold us in position. We'll need to get that hydraulic system number 4 turned on before we have pressure in the brake accumulator, this brake pressure indicator. Confirm that our cutoff switches for all 4 engines are in the cutoff. And just make this a little easier to see. So here's our fuel cutoffs. They're all in the off position. AP is ready to go. So we want to disconnect ground services from the aircraft. Oh, we're bouncing all over the place here. Sorry about that. Ground services, we want to release the air conditioning. We want to release ground power. And those will be disconnected here in a moment. You can see that the vehicle is actually picking up the air conditioning unit and disconnecting it from the aircraft. That should be better. So air conditioning unit is departing. And we'll do our pre-flight checklist, so we're almost ready to go. So a couple last minute things we need to get done. We've got our V speeds. We want to set our MCP for takeoff. I really don't like the way it jumps around like that sometimes, and I'm trying to adjust the camera. I do apologize for that. Our V2 speed was 165, so we're going to drop that in here. Our runway heading for runway 7 or 8, whichever one you prefer. It looks like it's runway 8. We need to get that information. And actually, what we can do is we can just go ahead and spin this around and get it lined up. So it's going to be about right. Looks like about 73. That would make sense. Our initial altitude we don't have yet. One thing we can do is go ahead and file our IFR clearance. So we'll bring up the radio and we'll ask for clearance.
Jacksonville clearance delivery. Delta 6301 Heavy, ready to copy IFR clearance. Lindbergh. Delta 6301 Heavy, cleared Lindbergh Airport. Filed. Fly runway heading climb and maintain 12000. Departure frequency 123.8. Squawk 0614. Delta 6301 Heavy, cleared at Lindbergh Airport as filed. Fly runway heading climb and maintain.
So we've got our departure altitude of 12,000. We're going to put that in over here. We also have our transponder code of 0614. Verify that that's in. It is. We'll go ahead and put this to the expander position. Exterior doors are locked and armed. Okay, so we're just about ready for pushback, but before we do that, we want to go to the overhead console and get our demand pumps, our hydraulic demand pumps in the right position. The first pump we need to turn on and get active is pump number 4. And we're actually going to put that down in the auxiliary position so it has electrical power according to the startup operational guide for the 747. And then we want to take the other demand pumps 1, 2, and 3 and place them in the auto position. So we'll stick them all in auto and make sure that our system fault lights all go out. So far everything looks good. Our press light will remain on for the demand pump number 4, and that's normal. So all that looks good. We also want to make sure that we get our fuel tanks turned on. So we want to turn on all the main pumps. So our center, all engines, 1, 2, 3, and 4 main pumps all get turned on. And then we need to see how much fuel is actually in the center wing tank. So if we go back down to our ECAS display here and bring up our fuel page, currently we don't have any fuel at all in the center based on this particular flight, so we don't need to turn on the center wing tank fuel pumps at all. We can leave those off. And since we're getting ready to push back from the gate and start the engines, this is perfect time to turn on our beacon light. So we'll want to go up here and turn the beacon, both the upper and the lower, on. So we'll put that to the both position. Back down, just a quick check at the ECAS. We want to do a quick cancel recall. Take a look at our error messages, make sure we don't see anything out of the ordinary. Everything appears to be normal. Nothing that we don't expect to see at this time. And now that we've got hydraulic pressure going, and we can kind of verify that by looking at the synoptics page specifically for hydraulics, we can see that those systems are all initialized and we've got pressure across the system. We can manipulate our trim for this particular flight. So we want to do our stabilizer trim back on the reference page specifically for takeoff. Recall that we had a trim of 5.6 is what we need to set. So if we look down here, we've got our stabilizer trim indication, and we're pretty close. We want to drop down here a little bit So 5.6 is about right there. 5.5, 5.6. Aileron trim and rudder trim all get set to 0, and we would do our before start checklist now. So before start checklist, we want to, since we've got the power and the air conditioning disconnected, we want to go back to ground services and get the cones and the wheel chocks removed. Notice that our brake pressure has been it's raised back up to its normal level, so we can pretty much trust that our parking brake is going to hold the plane in position. And wheel chocks removed. And before we do a pushback, we jump outside. We also want to request that the jetway be removed from the aircraft. And with that in place, we are now ready to request pushback. Before we do that, I always jump ahead right here at this point. Let me just make sure that we have taxi clearance, which we did not have.
Jacksonville ground, Delta 6301 Heavy, with Oscar, ready to taxi IFR. Delta 6301 Heavy, taxi to and hold short of runway 7, heading taxiway Hotel, Juliet, Alpha, Lima. Contact tower on 118.3 with route. Taxi, hold short runway 7, heading taxiway Hotel, Juliet, Alpha, Lima. Delta 6301 Heavy.
I want to take a quick look at the taxi direction. So we're going to be pushing back, and it looks like we're going to push the tail left, nose to the right. Let the ground crew come out here and get in position and to start our pushback.
Hello, Captain. We're ready for pushback. Locking gear. Departure check completed. Bypass bin inserted. Release sparking brakes. Commencing push. All engines clear. Start at will.
Okay, so we have clearance to start the engines. We're going to start number 4 engine first. We're going to pull out on this button here. That's going to give us the engine rotation that we need to do our startup. Go back down here and look at our engine controls. And we can see we've got some activity on engine number 4. We want to go to the fuel cutoff switch and fire it up. And then we'll monitor the engine initialization parameters. eye on our pushback as well. Sometimes they go a little far. That looks pretty good. We're going to have them stop right there. All right, we've got a good startup on engine number 4.
Set parking brakes.
We're going to start up engine number 1 now. And just so you can see visually what I'm doing with the overhead console, we're going to pull this button out for engine number 1. We got engine number 1 is starting to rotate. We're going to turn the fuel control cutoff to run.
Unlocking gear.
Jump outside there.
Tow truck disconnected. Bypass.
You can see engine number 1 is starting up. And looks like just about there on engine number 1.
Left is clear. Right is clear.
Now, one thing I was supposed to do there before starting the engines that I didn't do is you're really supposed to turn off 2 packs. So I'm going to start up 2 engines here next. So I'm going to turn off packs 1 and 2 for a moment. Confirm that those engines they're both good, stabilized. Go back overhead. We're going to start 2 engines here, so both 2 and 3. Look outside real quick, and you can see that the start procedure is causing those engines to start rotating, and we need to complete that startup. Oh, I hate when it jumps around like that. Complete that startup by turning on these fuel controls to run. Just about stabilized. We want to go back up with the engine started. Everything's good. Put our packs back on. With the engine started, we no longer need the APU generator because we're getting power from the engine, so we're going to turn the APU off. And likewise, we're going to go down here to the hydraulic pump number 4, and we're going to move that up to auto. Interesting that I have an off light over here. That's a little unusual. Seems to have cleared itself right now. Let's see if I have any warnings on the ECAS page. I do have some fuel overrides indication that those switches are off. They are off on purpose. Go back and take a quick look at our fuel page. So we've got a larger quantity of fuel in our inboard main tanks 2 and 3 as opposed to outboard main 1 and 4. So it looks like it wants us to turn on the override switches, so we can do that to try and get a balance set up there in the wings. Alright, that takes care of that ECAS warning. We'll monitor our fuel consumption till those balance out a little bit. AP was off, our nacelle anti-ice switches and aft cargo heat. So the anti-ice switches, we shouldn't need those at all today. So they're all off right now. We do want to turn on the aft cargo heat now that we're closed up. Ground equipment is clear. We got clearance from the ground crew. We want to go ahead and get our flaps ready for takeoff, so we are doing flaps 10. We want to do a quick flight control check. Oh, here it is. It's on the engine page. So from the engine page, we have the flight controls over here to the right. Very basic display of the flight controls. We just do a quick test of the flight controls. Believe it or not, I actually have had some issues with my flight controller going dead for some unknown reason on a couple of flights, so I do make it kind of a general practice of making sure that my flight stick works. Rudder control left. Rudder control right. Rudder control is a little slow. Everything back to center, looks good, so we can check that off the list. We'll do one more last check of our cancel recall. So TCAS is off. We're getting ready to go down the runway. We can go ahead and put that on. At this airport, they're probably tracking planes on the ground. Put that up there in TARA. We'll see that it's TA only when it's on the ground. And before we go anywhere, we want to get our taxi lights on. So our runway, here's our taxi light, we'll turn that on. Get our taxiway turn-off lights turned on. All the other lights should be good. Nav lights and the beacon lights are already on. We don't need any wing or logo lights, so we'll leave those alone for right now. We are ready to taxi to our runway. So we'll come out here. And as we start our taxi, one thing we're going to do is check the brakes. So we'll accelerate briefly here, get the plane rolling. And as we start to roll just a little bit, do a quick check of the brakes. They look like they're good to go, so we'll proceed on to the taxiway. Instrumentation is all looking good. We're not showing any errors. I do see one step that I have overlooked. And we'll take care of that here in just a moment. It's not a big deal. Better to have discovered it now before starting our takeoff. So we're heading to either runway 7 or runway 8, whichever you want to refer to it as. Clearly it's been identified with both numbers. The ATC and the FSX application wants to call it runway 7. The flight plan and sim brief and all the other references to the runway are calling it runway 8. So while we're going down the taxiway here, I want to jump up over here and turn on my LNAV, arm my LNAV and my VNAV. That's the step that we missed. That's going to be important once our flight plan kicks in after taking off. So watch our ground speed up to 25. Slowing down there a little bit much. Speed up the engines. So we're approaching the threshold for the runway. We're going to come to a stop right here, do a couple last minute checks so flaps are in the right position. We want to go up here overhead and get our landing lights turned on for takeoff. We also want to turn on our strobe light. Good to go. Make sure that our projected takeoff is set, RTO is set, we're prepared there. Transponder is turned on. All of our NCP settings are set. We're going to go ahead and request takeoff clearance.
Jacksonville Tower, Delta 6301 Heavy at runway 7, ready for takeoff. IFR to Whisper. Delta 6301 Heavy, cleared for takeoff. Runway 7.
So we have our cleared for takeoff.
Cleared for takeoff. Runway 7, Delta 6301 Heavy.
Get out here on the runway and get lined up. Get lined up with the heading bug here. We're going to do a static takeoff. So we're going to click the clock here, get our timer going, get our engine spooled up to about 55%. Release the brake. Start to get going. We'll engage Toga.
Jacksonville Tower, Pacifica 9019er, ready to go. Runway 7, IFR, Baltimore. Pacifica 9019er, taxi into position and hold. Position and hold. Pacifica 9019er.
Watch our V1s coming up. V1. Rotate. Looks like we have positive rate of climb. Gear up. Keep an eye on the flight director. Make sure we don't overshoot that. Bring our flaps back in 1.
123.8 for Delta 6301 Heavy.
Watch our airspeeds continuing to climb.
Cleared for takeoff. Runway 7.
Bring our flaps back in another position. Bring flaps 1, we're still good. I'm going to go ahead and engage the autopilot. Bring our flaps all the way in. Everything looks good so far. We do need to turn the plane, so we want to vector back around to ATC is vectoring us around, so we want to do turn to 260. It's 6 o'clock. I'm not going to be able to see 6 o'clock. So leaving Jacksonville, Florida, we should be able to see the runway that we took off from. There it is. If you look over there in the distance, there's the airport we just took off from. So I want to zoom out here a little bit on our navigation display, and we can see that coming up off to the right, we have our waypoint of Derte, and that's where we want to re-engage our flight plan. So right now we're flying vectors from ATC. I'm going to go ahead and select the Derte, drop it in as our vectors position, execute that. That is now our next waypoint, and re-engage lateral navigation. And that's going to actually comply with the guidance that we just received from air traffic control to turn right to heading 265. So that's pretty much the direction we're going to be flying here in a moment, 265. We're going to spin this pointer around to approximately 265. Climb, so we'll bump up to 2400. With all this noise coming from the aircraft, I'm going to have to tweak the volume here a little bit, because honestly it's getting hard to hear air traffic control. So now we're engaged back with the flight plan heading towards our first waypoint. With us being above 15,000 feet, we can turn off the landing lights. Our landing gear is up, so we can turn off the runway turn-off lights, as well as turn off the taxi lights. Everything else remains on. Spot check our ECAS. Don't see no warnings. Our passenger signs are on. Our EPIS control, this is normal because we're using the right CDU to control that display. Pretty clear skies out right now. Looks like it's a little bit overcast. Some fog there off into the distance. One thing we haven't set, we've gone up through 18,000 feet. We're getting an indication that we need to change our altimeter setting. So we're going to go to standard. Looks like the altimeter was actually off a little bit for takeoff, which I kind of noticed that the ground level wasn't accurately depicted on the altitude tape. So I didn't pick that up before takeoff. But we can correct that when we come in for descent and arrival into San Diego. Shouldn't be a problem. That'll certainly be more important at that point, landing, than it was for takeoff. Everything's looking good. We are step climbing up to 24,000 feet. That's not going to be our flight level. On about 325 knots. Working our way through our flight plan. go down here, we can look at programming. So our flight at this point to San Francisco, we've got about expected arrival time 17:53 Zulu time in California. We should have plenty of fuel left once we arrive there. And looks like distance to our destination 1,790 nautical miles. And we just got some climb guidance, so we'll do that. So not much else to see here right now. We are on our way to San Diego International Airport, climbing through tentative flight level of 360, 36,000 feet, 326 knots currently. And we're doing our handoffs through the various airspace. So before I depart from this flight, there's one more thing I wanted to show you. I want to bring over the actual moving maps. You remember we were showing us at the airport in Jacksonville, parked at the gate. Well, you can zoom out and we can track our actual flight over land using the moving map, and it'll track along with us, shows us the other AI traffic that's up there in the air. This is really cool too, because from this view we can zoom out and see the traffic around us, see more of the coastline of the United States, and even better to give you better recognition of where you are over the United States, we can turn on the street map overlay, and now we can see that we're departing Jacksonville, we're heading towards Tallahassee. Just a great add-on for FSX. I really do like this. It brings a lot to the game and makes it easier to track and see where you are in relationship, where you are over land in any given time. So, and then the other thing, there's a lot of handoffs that occur with ATC in the game, and originally I found those really annoying because it just seems like they're kind of random and haphazard. But this also will show us the airspace, and that's really what's impacting us. So if I put up the airspace, you see all these various lines. This is everyone's identified airspace. So as we cross these lines, we're actually entering a different controller's airspace, and that's when these handoffs occur. So all these circles, we might enter and depart various controlled airspace, and that's when ATC gives us the guidance to contact such and such station on a given channel. So this kind of helps to explain and clarify that and why that happens so frequently, because there is so much airspace out there, so much defined airspace, I should say. So not much else to see here. We're climbing to flight level 340. I do appreciate you watching this video. Thanks for coming to Liam Locke Gaming. I'm Liam Locke, and this is the 747, and we are on our way to San Diego International Airport. Thank you for watching, and we will see you for the arrival. See ya.